My name is Halima, and I will be the moderator for this first discussion that we have. Now, before we get started, I would just like to let you know what MutiARTS is exactly. MutiARTS is part of Tamba Africa's Wellness Program, and this is an exploration into the healing power of arts, different creative mediums that we have indigenous to the African continent, but also on a broader context. But for the purpose of this conversation, we're going to be looking at creative expression from an African context. So MutiARTS, when translated as medicine arts, is how can art and creative purpose really fulfill our need for mental health and enrich our mental well-being. So joining me for today's discussion are 4 esteemed panelists here in Harare, and we also have 1 guest panelist joining us from Malawi. And I will introduce them from my left to my right. First, I have Fortune with me, who is a mental health advocate, and she is pioneering the use of creative arts with us today for the use of helping men specifically and young boys in marginalized communities to combat the effects of mental illness and the COVID-19 pandemic. So welcome, Fortune. Thank you so much. Next, we have Taf Bob, who's a great friend of Tamba Africa. We've worked with him on a number of projects, and he is an actor, director, and the most fascinating part is he works with ritual theater. So we'll be looking forward to hearing more about that and how we can apply it to mental well-being as well. Welcome, Taf Bob. After that, we have Father Matsefane Morare SJ, who is one of our partners through the Arupa Jesuit University and the Center of African Studies. And he'll be joining us today as a cultural thinker and a visionary really for what it means to incorporate and encompass our Africanness and our culture. So welcome, Father Matsefane. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And last but not least, live here with me is Farai, who is, again, a great friend of Tamba Africa. We've worked with the Culture Fund on a number of projects, and we're happy to have him here today. He's a co-founder, co-director, and we're really excited because he has a really, really in-depth view, having worked with UNESCO, about the use of culture and how it can be applied to our, modern day situation. So thank you so much, Farai, for joining us today. Joining us on Zoom is Sarah. Hi, Sarah. And she's going to be a very key partner for us in the MutiARTS program. She will be also one of our facilitators in Malawi when we travel there, hopefully with COVID permitting later on this year. And Sarah has a myriad of creative expressions to her title. So I'll let her get into that a little bit later. But welcome, Sarah, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hi, Sarah. Right, so to get us started,
I think, first of all, I work for the Culture Fund Trust, and director of the Culture Fund. But I also am part of the international panel of experts under the UNESCO Convention 2005, which is the only international instrument that looks at promoting diversity of cultural expressions around the world. One of the things I said to invite is whether the right person to be part of this panel in this area, because I'm an administrator primarily, and I work in the area of governance of culture. And I'm not an academic in culture arts, but I can share experiences from the perspective of my engagement with culture and arts. And so, first of all, as a premise to know why I'm here, one of the things I was reading from the concept is seeking to expand definitions and meaning, and that immediately said to me, when you are looking at people who want to change definitions, expand definitions, the premise of that statement is the current definitions have got something that they want to interrogate, right? So, but also it brings to mind the importance of words, meaning, concepts of definitions. And so MutiARTS is something that I was not familiar with as a concept, as a definition. So one of the things that you do is that you perhaps bring it back to your culture, your worldview, to see where is it located, where are these people wanting you to be here and interrogate it and have a discussion around it. The same then applies to culture, that you can't pin one definition of culture. It can perhaps only be a process that involves over time human beings interacting with one another, human beings interacting with their environments, and human beings reacting to, say, elements over a period of time. Generationally, you have this dialogue where you're saying these practices, these norms, do we keep, do we change, do we let go? And perhaps this is one of the things that we're doing here. You're seeking to look at what we collectively see in different parts of the world, in different parts of different lives as culture, right? It is that continuous process of defining in terms of engagement that we have with the environment. And one of the most obvious ways of seeing that process through is by expressing it, right? Either to ourselves or other people, and then we engage with it. And therefore the arts become a tool, a vehicle for us keeping check with the changes that are happening in the human condition. So in that sense, we have to look at the broader definition of culture and the meaning of things. And therefore, my contribution as we start is to also ask you, the conveners of this dialogue, what your intention is about the meanings of things. I recall the story, perhaps many people read, young Lewis Carroll and Alice in Wonderland, the conversation with Humpty Dumpty and Alice about words and meanings. And Alice is asking Humpty Dumpty, that she thought that a single word can have different meanings, multiple meanings. And Humpty Dumpty says, he's very specific, that he uses words very specifically, and they do not mean things that they're not supposed to mean. But at the end of the day, Humpty Dumpty then says, whoever defines becomes a master. And culture, therefore, has those elements of practice, of defining, of then prescribing sometimes, and then others may be rejecting the prescriptions. So it's going to be interesting to hear the other colleagues in terms of their perceptions of what culture is.
On the subject of words having different meanings, not the same word being applicable in many different ways. I mean, that's what we're here to also explore, right? Is expression through words, through storytelling, through different forms. This colloquium is specifically for expressive medicine, which covers a variety of creative mediums. And just to also pick up on that, as a director, I'm assuming when you are looking at creating your work, you're also looking at how the words impact the audience, especially when you're looking at ritual theater, where you have to be almost intentional, if not have to be intentional, about what you're putting forward to people who are consumers of your work.
Yeah, it's it has to be specific, and you need to do like your research and your very clear. But also speaking of words, recently I've just been having challenges with the term where that theater that we are doing is already quote unquote like a ritual, or even the so-called rituals are our theater. So what is the separation between the ritual and the theater, and then also looking at like the so-called rituals, how perhaps as a theater maker, how you can borrow from the rituals and then use them for your own theater. but because most of these rituals have some kind of a religious or spiritual connotation, the question then becomes, is it possible for you to do a piece of art, a piece of expressive art that does not have any religious or spiritual effect or connotation, you know? And then also looking at just the traditional expressive arts that are available specifically for medicine. You know, you look at, for example, at funerals, the sawira, or the friend of the deceased, right? The deceased then takes on the part of the clown. He becomes the clown to the bereaved. He wears the clothes of the deceased. He takes on the character. He makes jokes about the deceased. He all the secrets of the deceased are revealed. You know, even the Aurora, the in-laws, they also take that role of playing. You know, so the funeral then the sort of like the healing then is already in motion. You know, where, you know, yes, it's somber, people are mourning, people are reflecting on the life of the deceased, but they're also celebrating the life of this person, you know. Like I think it's very effective. Sorry, I'm talking too much. I have a friend who recently lost their father, you know, because of COVID. And now, because of the regulations that are available right now regarding the funerals and you know, how people are buried, there was no time for her to process, you know, that the father is gone, because there was no sawira who was doing all of that, you know, the clowning, and there was no varoras and the youthies of the what do you call it, of the community who are playing drums. You know, that's also part of the healing. You know, it's like, yes, we can take it as like entertainment and art, but it's part of, it's sort of like, I think that's a classic example of sort of like multi-medicine or art for healing, because they're not just playing the drums to entertain themselves, but they're playing the drums to, you know, some of the songs that you sing in funeral, particularly looking at the GT, or the one that they play in Mrewa and Mashonaland in these provinces, all those spaces. Sometimes they actually mock the deceased. They actually, you know what I mean? Like, there's some kind of convening of like, yes, this has happened, but let's heal ourselves. So yeah, I forgot what the point I was trying to make, but I think you're getting my nonsense.
Before coming about words. So muti in Shona has 4 meanings. So which one are you asking us to, you know, look at in terms of MutiARTS? Muti could be a tree. Muti could be a plant, right? Muti could be medicine. Muti, it could be, you know, other things, depending on the intonation.
Yeah.
And so MutiARTS, trying to locate it in traditional art, in traditional culture, tree art, herbal art, medicine art.
Yeah.
So what are specific meanings and intentions as well that you've given us the latitude not to be confined to one, but you're prepared, obviously, that if we challenge even MutiARTS, you may also open up to different imaginations about what MutiART really intends to do.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And if I can actually pick up on that and bring in a bit of what Tafwat said, if we are looking, even if we dissect it to tree art, I'm automatically taken to, you know, people who do carving or woodwork, and that's meditation of etching and designing, you know, that process in itself. I mean, people will look at, to go back to the clowning, look at masquerade, chibure, or, you know, that kind of traditional practice, where so much of what's around us is incorporated into the culture of healing itself. So yes, we could have, separated the Muti into a specific, but when you think about holistic well-being, it incorporates more than just the physical, right? You're looking at different levels of an individual that need to reconcile in order to find that harmony and balance to bring about healing. And on the subject of masquerade, I'd like to just bring in Sarah really quickly, because later on in this MutiARTS process, we're going to be looking at Vimbuza dance, which is a traditional healing dance from Malawi. Just because I think so much of the masquerade has been lost to modern civilization in Zimbabwe. And I'm just wondering how much of that practice is still alive within the Malawi context, because it's something that is very innate to the culture there and is very important and is significant to healing, especially for the Tubuka people. So I don't know, Sarah, if you could just tell us a bit more about, if we're looking at expressive art from the point of view of masquerade, or the gule, or shigule, depending on which part of Southern Africa you're from.
Yeah, thank you so much, Halima. Indeed, the gule remains an integral part of artistic expression, but in its many expressions. A minute there, I think my connection was shaky. But as I was saying, it still remains an integral part of the definition of healing at a traditional level. However, I think what more urbanites are missing is the fact that we have separated ourselves from the traditional point of contact when people are seeking healing overtly. However, it has been integrated into other modern forms of expression, overtly and not also. We'll find that many urban artists today are able to translate the meaning of the healing arts, of the Vimbuza arts. I'm speaking of people such as Nyago, who is one of the prominent modern day Vimbuza artists in the country, who has been able to bring back into the limelight the healing process and power of this younger urbanites, and Grin, who is able to bring back the Gule culture. The most bizarre or interesting thing is that these healing arts continue to be an integral part of every day. However, they have been integrated so well, perhaps, into urban artistic expression that people do not recognize them for what they are. They are recognized more as a form of entertainment, rather as a form of healing. And I think that maybe that is not such a bad thing. The fact that the practice of healing has become such an integral part of everyday existence that everyone is taking it on without necessarily having to define it as a healing process. So you could potentially be in a process of perpetual and continuous healing. However, maybe the question is there a need for a more, more depth and deliberateness in healing as a process, in the sense that if we look back historically, you'll find that artistic expression was maybe almost the climax of a healing process. So for instance, in Vimbuza, you would go through the healing process, which would culminate in the physical expression, in the dance and the music itself. My personal lineage, my great-grandmother being a healer herself, would take you through a process that was actually defined by silence and the consumption of various concoctions and herbs that would then culminate into an artistic expression of sound and art and drawing on rock and so on and so forth. So I think that we're in a really interesting position right now, whereby we've successfully moved on, perhaps as modern urban human beings, in a way that we've brought the healing into everyday existence, but perhaps maybe we may be missing on the depth of healing by not being more deliberate about the process itself. This is one of the questions that I have pondered over and tend to ask myself.
you know, some of these healing arts we've integrated so much that we've forgotten to identify that they exist for our benefit. How much of that do you think is true for the local context here in Harare, especially where you work?
Well, to be honest, I think in terms of healing, in Harare, I don't think people really concentrate on it like that. It's not healing. I don't think people are intentional about actually calling it healing. No one is really looking for help. I've worked in a setup where you get people getting into the office and it's one of those, oh no, I was told I could just come here and you can tell me something because you're a counselor and you're just going to tell me one or two things and I'll be fine afterwards. No, but when it's something about healing, it has to come from a deep place. It's not one day you're going to sit and you're going to think everything's going to be okay. The thing is, people have taken up on a lot of stuff, meditation, people like to dance, people like to drink. It has been in our culture. And the whole bida, stuff like that, meditation, it's always been there. Like I like what she just said, that her grandmother used to make her sit down and then they would have a moment of silence. Meditation, yoga, you have time to actually sit down and take that in. But people are not really doing it like that. People are just walking and diving in straight into life. They're not taking time to actually pause and just say, okay, let me just talk to myself. Let me sit down and just say, okay, what's going on? What's going on with my mood right now? Why aren't I doing this? Why am I feeling like, why am I down? A lot of people are just functioning. They're on zombie mode, flight mode. They're just going. They're not taking time to concentrate on that. And I think if I'm going to talk about her, wow, there's nothing really going on in terms of healing. I could pick at least 3 out of 10 people that are really intentional about healing and going out and looking for it. But for people that are intentional about it, I actually think in the rural areas, maybe, because they're gonna take time out to say, because you're out in the open, you're refreshing, because you're not in the hustle and bustle of being in the town, city, and trying to drive from work and going there, and the next thing you're home, you have a whole routine. In the rural areas, there's nothing like that. You're just living the day as it comes. And if you're gonna sit down with the neighbor next door, you're gonna have a pure conversation. You know each other, but nowadays you're locked up, you're not talking to the next person, and life is meant to go on like that. But you need that socialization, which has always been there. You need that time out, you need that fresh air, you need even that walk to go get water. You need all that. You need the bida, you need the everything. You need it. You need to connect with earth. You need to connect with yourself. And that's the basis of healing. That's the basis of life in general. Yeah.
I'm curious to hear from, because you've given let's say an urban perspective, but a very hybrid version of an urban perspective. And yes, we do have some, cultural thinkers amongst us. So also to pose the same question, do you believe that we are just walking through and not really being conscious of the tools we have expressively around us to help us in a sense of healing from a cultural perspective?
Well, it's been fascinating listening to everybody coming at this from different perspectives. And I think it reflects the reality of the African experience in urban spaces and rural spaces and all that. We often live, even though we're occupying the same ground, but live in different worlds, and we sort of function on different paradigms. And especially when we live in urban spaces, even though we're in Africa and everything else, we still use a very European paradigm to deal with our problems, to seek for healing, right? For most educated, urbanized people, when we begin to have emotional problems and that kind of thing, the first thing you want to do is to go talk to a psychologist, a counselor, and all that is very Freudian. It's between me and you. We sit down and we talk, and I turn my pain, my experiences into a narrative. And that in itself is a healing, provides healing, but within an African space, it's never complete. And this is why sometimes I think as Africans, we tend to be schizophrenic about how we deal with these matters, because you go for counseling, you go to your psychologist or whatever it is, then you talk your heart out and you come out, but still not there. Something is missing, right?
And for the majority of Africans who never go to such spaces, therefore there is no avenue for healing for them. Right? There has to be another space for them to find healing. And therefore, the African spaces provide that, but we don't take advantage of that within urban spaces, right? But something subversive happens because you go to the theater, you watch something, and some performer is doing something, even street art. You see a performer doing something in the street, and something touches you, and it's almost as if it's guerrilla healing that's going on, that you were not going there to look for healing in urban spaces, but you find healing in all these spaces, in art, in the things that you see around you, and that kind of thing. Exactly. While not needing it, but not looking for it. So, and I think this is where this is so important for us, that we have something very valuable, we have something very powerful, an avenue for us to find healing through the arts, through expression of ourselves, right? Many people, for instance, are afraid of seeking for healing alone. But when we're dealing with collective healing, when I go and meet other people, we participate in whatever ritual there is, in whatever song, dance, I can be invisible, but still be visible. I can express my fears, I can express my pain and everything else without being alone in this, being with other people, getting support from other people, and that kind of thing. And it's even more interesting because even church spaces, which, because of the European influence, have tended to focus on the individual in terms of prayer, even meditation, that kind of thing. But the African thing is also subverting those spaces, because you find that in many of the services, many of the occasions, the drums are becoming much more important, and the dancing and the sweating, and people come out of church sweating. And I'm missing something there, right? What is it that these people were trying to express? So they're not there just being receptive of whatever it is that they're being fed, which is the European way of dealing with healing, but they're there to express themselves, in fact, as a form of catharsis, right? Through the experience of collective healing and that kind of thing. And I think when you raise the question of Muti, right? I think there's something about that which for me is quite significant, that the tree is something in the public space. And we look for healing as Africans within the public space, rather than going and hiding ourselves somewhere where a doctor will concoct something in private and you have no idea what it is. It just comes with a label called paracetamol, and you get that and you go home. But the African way is public spaces, public healing, public ritual, public expression, catharsis is that. Finally, because our trauma oftentimes is collective. I mean, as Africans, we're masters of trauma. We carry so much trauma, it's unbelievable, right? And therefore, even when we seek for healing, we've learned that it's much safer, much easier, and much more effective to seek healing, not just for the self, but to get healed together with the others that we suffered with.
So where did we get this idea that we don't talk about our problems? Because that seems to be quite a thing. Speaking from a local perspective, I can't speak for every culture, but just speaking for people around my immediate community, this culture of we don't talk about our problems, we keep our problems, even amongst family, we don't talk about our issues, we keep everything, hush hush. Where did that come from then?
I think, I think it's coming from the the thing that we were talking about before of accepting things as they are. It's like these days people say Muharare unofanira kungwafa. So kungwafa ufana kungwara uchimbafa. So ngwara uchiba. Like things are not working, nothing is really working, especially for young person or even the older generations. Things are not working, but we don't want to talk about the dysfunctionality of how things are. We just like it is what it is. But So even like people go to my church, there's so many like quote unquote put them in quotes, like fake prophets or prophets, but we just like say, no, God will judge them. We don't want to talk about that problem or the danger or the trauma that people are carrying from being victimized by the prophets. It is what it is. Just deal with it. You are Zimbabwean, we're strong. We always find this false sense of like toxic positivity. It's gonna be all right. Yes, you have trauma, but you'll be fine. You'll be fine. It is what it is. Yeah.
I don't know. If I may,
I wasn't clear about that. I'm not so sure. Are you saying that we don't talk about mental health problems, or we don't talk about problems generally? Because is it about the modern urban African cultures?
I mean, yes, because we have created a hybrid culture within the urban space, right? And my experience of it has been, you can say, things are really tough. You can complain, but you cannot discuss your problem. And I think there has to be a differentiation. We're very good at complaining about what's wrong with us. But when somebody actually asks you, tell me what's going on, most people shy away from responding.
Well, I suppose this maybe now takes us back to your original question to me about what we perceive as culture. And this particular dialogue can actually open up so many interesting dimensions of exploring culture itself. The one thing that we don't do as much now is really to look at the African worldview and what has happened to it. I picked up a book and was rereading Goodworth Yogo's Petals of Blood, and looking at whether, when children are growing up now, what sort of worldview are they growing up in, right? And in terms of, the mechanisms that allowed families and groups to talk about different kinds of problems, and why you were saying that the tree as a metaphor for a meeting place, a feeding place, is that all these things worked before. They were ways to have collective discussions, sharing. And even going to your psychologist, psychiatrist was a collective matter. You go together as a family, go and sit in front of a healer, and then you all discuss this one issue collectively. Very, personal issues. And so that's also transformed with the advent of Christianity, perhaps, but also Western culture. But one of the things that may need to be discussed a little bit more is if you have no longer had a clear African worldview, and the children you are educating do not actually understand how these different things serve a collective purpose of the general well-being of not just you as an individual, but collectively, then that is why we are walking, blindfolded, and we're just bumping into, anything that that appeals to us, very superficial. Because we've lost the deeper sense of why was there music? Why were there rituals? Why did we drink together? Why were grandmothers sitting in front of the fire? Why, all these things were meant to, collectively anchor us, and then also allow us to share experiences. And now people are saying the extended family has become too much of a burden. But by definition, extended family means that everyone is sticking into your life. And if everyone is sticking into your life, therefore at some point you need to stick back. So you open up into other people's life. But all that is sort of disappeared. And we're having to redefine how all this can work. And it's interesting, the Catholic experience with the acculturation, inculturation. For example, when I was saying to someone that the Bira player Mashoko was the first black Zimbabweans to play mbira in the 40s and 50s in a Catholic church, right? That idea that the Catholic Church accepted that instruments of African traditional nature can also be used to praise God and seek healing with, right? As much as you do it in the mirror. But the bringing in of drums, African drums, the bira into the Oshos, into, say, Western, well, it's not Western, Judaic, Christian tradition, is also an understanding that there are things that were embedded in African cultures that are not in contradiction with faith in, say, Christianity. And I don't know, maybe another discussion will be to look at the theater of the Pentecostal churches, for example. It's a discussion I have in my family with members who attend Pentecostal, especially what they so-called the all-nighters. And I have a feeling that the all-nighters are now packing quite a lot of things in there. They are packing in social elements of our needs, going to nightclub, going to dance, going to listen to loud music, going to play music, and also hopefully meditate and pray. But I also assume that's seeking healing. But I think people are bringing all these things into these spaces without really understanding what worldview is driving it and what are the purposes of it. And so a lot of people are just following others and being led to spaces where, I don't know, maybe on a good day, some of those spaces is just like a disco. Others are genuinely about prayer and meditation, right? But it's really touch and go.
But is that not the problem with what is like over-intellectualizing the arts a little bit? Because if we are going to start defining the arts in terms of this is disco, this is not disco, this is entertainment, and this is not entertainment, when in fact the arts is just the expressions of whatever is going on inside of the playwright, the actor, the creative individual, whoever it is that is manifesting these expressions, right? And you go and you experience that, and you allow community, the individuals to experience that, without actually laying preconditions as to what is it that this is expressing, right? Once you remove all those descriptions or pre-descriptions about your experience, and you just say, look, I'm opening up, I'm going to experience something new, then what you get out of it opens up in terms of possibilities. But if you say this particular person is expressing what people used to do 200 years ago, right? Then it becomes some academic thing where you're sitting there watching a reflection of 200 years ago. When in fact, what we're experiencing is an opportunity for healing, for creativity, for learning something new, and becoming a little bit of who you are.
Interesting, yeah.
I'm curious to hear from you, Sarah, how much of this phenomenon that's been discussed on a multi-level also resonates within your community, because we're not speaking just on behalf of our local Harare/Zimbabwean community, but we really want to make it as Southern African as possible, and then maybe as Pan-African as possible. But how much of what is being said resonates with you and what's happening within your own communities?
A lot of it, absolutely. I think, starting from what shared at the beginning of the conversation on this matter is the issue of how we communicate and how we talk about challenges that we are facing. I think that, in my experience here in Malawi, for instance, there was a method of how people can express even negative emotions such as depression or anxiety. There was a framework, as was shared earlier, a family framework, perhaps for starters, but also a bigger social framework that gave people space and process as to how you actually talk about things. It's not so much a culture of silence, as there was a culture of how and where and when one would express themselves in different ways on different matters. And there were different, can I say, family as well as, tribal and communal structures that were deliberately put in place in order to offer support to somebody. And that is something that could no longer continue in the framework that it previously existed because of modern living. For instance, you've spoken about the matter of people being able to rely on immediate family members for support in various ways, because we used to live with immediate family members, and now that kind of existence is perceived as burdensome, probably likely because of the financial pressures that people face in a modern society where we're not able to cultivate and have food in a way that we used to. And now we have to think about channeling resources into these various, outlets in order to simply survive, which is very, very unfortunate. However, there is still an opportunity, I think, to keep the core of the value system of support. And that is something that is still ongoing in its traditional framework, as well as in a progressive framework. I think that we will lose a lot by trying to maintain a status quo as things used to be, because it is something that it is a situation that no longer exists. However, I think that maintaining the core of the value system is still valuable, and maybe that's what we need to question in modern society. Is there a way that we can continue to function as a symbiotic society that is supportive without having to succumb to, being self-serving, being greedy, being people who only exist, sincerely and legitimately on social media, but people who continue to lend support to each other in a multicultural society. I think one of the greater opportunities is something that I've seen happening in some of the peri-urban communities where we live. Because in these peri-urban communities, and I think this may be similar across Africa, is you have people who are coming from different places across the country. So people don't necessarily share tribal or linguistic ties or have the same value systems in terms of where they're coming from, their village setting, but they're able to create systems that function despite the fact that they don't have those kind of same, the exact same frameworks as we do in our traditional setting. For example, you'll find that despite the fact, the issue of bereavement, for instance, which is something else that came up earlier, in a traditional setting, the process for each tribal group is very, very clear. It's tried and tested. People are living in family circles, and it's quite, evident what is supposed to happen. However, still in urban settings, you'll find that people coming from different tribal groups, not knowing each other and not necessarily having family ties, are able to create a system and a framework, a system of support in a modern society that isn't so modern, because we cannot rely on government providing social services such as ambulances for when people get ill, or hearses for when people are deceased, and still people find a way to create new frameworks of support. But I think that what is integral to the creation of those new frameworks is not necessarily trying to replicate or perpetuate or insist upon frameworks that maybe don't function in a setting, but giving ourselves the license to maintain the core values, which remain community, which remain support systems that are inspired and still rooted in love. And that's where the real opportunity lies. And I think that this is where we can really integrate all of the various cultural systems and healing practices and still make them relevant, because they still are. They're still relevant, even if people want to masquerade them as processes resultant to religious belief. It isn't necessarily about, I think, subscription to a particular religious belief system, but rather the innate response that we all have to a spiritual need for community and for sharing of energy and healing between people, because that's how we survive. And we know that as human beings, which is why we gravitate towards living with each other, even when you don't know the people that you are living with in a community, such as in peri-urban communities. These are not your relatives, and yet you want to be together, because it's not so much a religious issue as it is a spiritual issue. And maybe what needs to be brought to the fore and what we need to focalize on is how do we build on pre-existing, tried and tested systems that are rooted in the need for mutual survival, in the real healing power between 2 people, 3 people, groups of people, without having to make those divisive because of their being rooted in, you know, selfishness or greed or anything like that, but continue to be rooted in love and a real desire to move forward and progress and be well as communities.
Can I just follow that up with another question and say, what are some of the tools that you have recognized, having, you know, working in a space where you are advocating for the well-being of youth, through MutiARTS and also through textile? What are some of the tools that you have found useful in the creative expression that have actually helped to reach a sense of well-being for your community?
So, you know, as I said earlier, we've often felt that, you know, creativity is the climax of a process of well-being, and not the purpose of well-being per se. And so what we try to do is really be open about, you know, creating space where people can create space. And what that really means is just allowing ourselves to have physical spaces that are deliberately created to be safe in peri-urban communities, where we ask questions and we do not provide answers, knowing that people are born with truth innate in them. And what we're doing is just making sure that we block out the noise so that people can come forward in a manner where they don't feel that they have to respond to their trauma in a way that is defined by anxiety and pain, but that they can say, this is what I think I need. And we can say, look, together we can find solutions in order for you to be well. And in that way, you'll find that everybody finds their own path as to how they can express themselves as an individual and as a collective creatively. And it's almost like that is the medicine that is created and then spread to other people. And then other people once again find their space in that healing, and it perpetuates itself. As somebody who has been in the development sector for some time, I'm aware of the buzz terminology around leadership, community leadership, and all of these sort of buzz terminologies that I think are a very, you know, respectable attempt to define the need that people have to find a way to self-express and to be in control of a process of well-being. However, I think that an opportunity is lost in defining what that is for everybody, as if it was a collective response, as if the answer for everybody's headache was Panadol, when really the answer is, what is the cause of your headache? You're the only one who can dig that deep to find out what it is. And our role as a symbiotic society is to be with you in that process and to be with each other, but not to define the process of your path for you. And I think that, you know, a lot is said about, you know, development projects and addressing what I think is a symptom of social sickness, which is poverty, violence, and all of these things that are being addressed from a surface level, when really the sickness, it's like saying that, you know, my sickness is my headache. No, your sickness is never your headache. Your sickness is whatever is dysfunctional in your physical body system that is causing a headache. And I think that it's always been, you know, it's been easier in the last couple of years for us to try and numb headaches with painkillers rather than address the issue of what you are feeding your body and your soul that is causing your sickness. And I think that we're afraid to do that, because the answer is that we will have to relinquish control. It means that we will have to relinquish the illusion that what we are here to do is to provide answers for people to be well, when really it is to provide space, because somebody may have told us that apparently in the provision of space for people will then define their healing in anarchy and violence, which is simply not true. It isn't true that when you leave people to define peace and well-being for themselves, that they will choose violence and anarchy. This has never been the case, and we have so many examples from ancient societies that we can pull from. Even right here in Africa, we're talking about rock carvings where people, partook in, potentially psychedelic herbs in order to transcend into a different, perspective, in order for them to find real solutions to social problems, individual problems for each other and for themselves as society. And I think that what we are afraid of is relinquishing control. But that's where the answer possibly lies, is in providing space, simply providing space for people to find definition in what is innate and what is spiritual and what is legitimate and can I say untarnished by all of the noise all around and the lack, and that is found really in internal abundance. So I think we have a real opportunity through conversations such as this one to become more and more aware of the fact that we are insisting on trying to solve problems in a manner that has clearly not served anybody. If we look around the world today, we see violence erupting in Afghanistan from here to there, all over the world. So clearly control is not the answer. So perhaps we need to dig a little deeper and look back into the past and solutions that did help societies to progress and be healthy in the past, and see how, not how we can necessarily replicate them, but how each individual can find their space to define well-being and collectively be well as societies going forward.
Really key points addressed there, as everybody was acknowledging.
Can I?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with everything. I do agree with everything that she says. But sometimes and she mentioned the question of urban and peri-urban spaces. Unfortunately, the one who deals with people who now knock on your door. I was just curious if you've ever, I don't know, prescribed, suggested somebody actually get involved in the arts, in traditional African ways of resolving issues, in art, as part of your treatment or suggestions of healing for people who walk on your door.
To tell you the honest truth, you don't exactly suggest. You don't say do this. You hint it, like, okay, what are your interests? What are you into? What is your thing? What do you connect with? And that's where you start. Because when you're gonna deal with stuff with mental and emotional health, it's not just about what you see outside. There's something deeper to it. So when you go for counseling, it's not like they're gonna tell you, okay, this is your problem right now. I'm just gonna give you this, or it could be because you're dehydrated. But there's probably something else deeper that leads somebody to actually come there, that causes them to have the headache, like she was saying. So that means you're gonna have to drag it out. So by dragging it out, you're getting into the soul of things. You're getting into a deeper part of it. So you're gonna tell somebody, okay, what do you connect with? Where are you like firmly grounded, where you feel, okay, I'm comfortable. This is my space. I feel safe. I feel I can express myself. So for me, that's where you start off with a person's personal healing. What do you connect with? What is your personal thing? And that's basically what I would prescribe to somebody. Because from there you'll find yourself. If it's gonna be in writing, you'll find yourself in it. If it's gonna be in dance, you don't teach someone to dance per se. Have you noticed in traditional dancing, when the drums play, there's a way somebody can just get up and they start dancing. I saw a video the other time of a lady. She was paralyzed, and the only thing that was functional was just her head and her hands. And then she used to dance when she was young. And then they started playing this harmony. And she started moving. It literally took her back into her youth. And you could see that from the way she was moving her hands, it was connecting. It was more or less how she used to dance when she was younger. So it's not about just what's there. It's about what's deep inside. So that's the best prescription, is basically what is inside. which is something we have to pull out, and it has to be something that's intentional for you to pull out and actually search for it, put it down there and just say, this is where I'm going to start. If you're going to lose like your key or a coin, you're going to have to search the whole house for it and find it.
I have a question for everyone. Because I hear everyone talking about communal healing and communal sort of practices. I'm just wondering, were there any sort of like traditional healing practices that were focused on the individual or the personal healing process or processes or traditions in the African context? Were they there, or that thing doesn't exist?
Can I share a story on the same, if you may allow me?
I think what I liked about the way Sarah sort of framed a proposition for reimagining how we can build more functional in terms of well-being societies, perhaps the modern era, is about energies. I think she spoke about energy and love. Love is a very difficult one to give a concept, but energy. And what perhaps the older African cultures were better at doing than what we are seeing now because of this dysfunctionality we can see, especially among younger people, is the ability to have these frameworks of interactions and spaces where you would find yourself areas that will allow you to open pathways for healing. Right? So it could be in the language, like the languages I'm sure Bantu languages are the same. In the morning, when you wake up and you're meeting with people, you say, in English, you say, morning, and then you get a cup of coffee, you say, morning, you go, right? In Shona, you say, mangwana is morning, you say, marara, tarara kana marara. So they'll say, morning, how did you sleep? I slept well. If you also slept well, so they're open-ended, right? It's allowing someone on a daily basis to start thinking, just in case someone needs something to talk about that happened last night, right? There's someone always ready to listen to what, right? So energy is always embedded in there. But there were also other spaces where a young woman could talk to an aunt, so called it Tete in Shona, right? On a one-to-one basis, where she opens up and says, you walk this journey. I like this guy, but my mom doesn't like this guy. I like this guy, but my father doesn't like this guy. And then she, no, something happened to me. And so that's one-to-one. And it is embedded in the aspects of preemptive healing.
Yeah.
Preemptive healing by prescribing ways of dealing with your reality in life before the need to take aspirin or the need to take other concoctions of medicine ever becomes a requirement. And so the arts as a natural prescription, and I think this is where the question is, and that it is interesting that modern psychology, psychiatry, and some of the work that Dr. Dixon Chibanda is doing is amazing, I think, in terms of locating some of the practices in Western science. Not that there was no science in African culture, there was a lot of science, and perhaps people like Patisamati who have written a bit about it can tell you where science was located in traditional African cultures. Is now for us to start looking at some of the things that were done in the past, but are able to write about them in a sort of recognizable in terms of Western canons of knowledge, and say, no, but this was actually very interesting. So why can't you prescribe music? Why do you prescribe Panadol and paracetamol if you can't prescribe Bob? I say, hang on a minute, I think just go to theater, right? Or go and listen to some Bob Marley and smoke some weed.
Yeah.
But the fascinating thing, the fascinating thing is that a lot of medical schools are actually creating programs of using the arts for healing, right? As part of the requirement to be a Western medical doctor, right? There are entire departments of hospital, the entire department is just created for the healing arts, where they do music, they do art, a lot of paint work is done, a lot of dance is done, and people actually prefer those non-invasive ways of finding healing,
Well, interesting, just building up on that. Perhaps one of the things that has not worked in Western civilization is if you look at access to art, the wealthier people had access to these prescriptions because they could pay to go to opera, to theater, and enjoy the art and through a collective catharsis with other wealthy people. So they don't really need to, it was always as an option. But the other class, you have to pay to go into a gallery, you have to pay to go into a theater, you have to pay to go into a cinema and so on. With traditional African cultures, everything was free. If there is a Jerusalem mandated dance, you were invited. There was no star. Everyone was asked to come in. Yes, there will be some who will be more exuberant than others. The gyrations will be more pronounced in some and not others, and so forth. But that also gives you an indication that even in those spaces, the Jerusalem Mbende one is very interesting because it's a sexual dance. This is about sexuality. And then the community would all in the open come and invite people to dance with people who are not their partners, right? And also while you're doing that, they're remembering things. They're remembering things like, oh, your husband, I don't think is good as my husband. Your wife is not good. And they're busy drumming these things, right? And that allowed people to come and express themselves publicly. And for some reason, we think and we thought that these societies did not allow that kind of expression, even for areas that are now, taboo areas to openly talk about sexuality and sexual, liberation. But these spaces allowed that to happen. And so when you denied people those spaces, they find them elsewhere. And this is what I'm saying, perhaps that's you're seeing the subversion and the recreation of these spaces, even in Christian tradition, Christian spaces. Because people are saying, no, but we had this before. We could listen to music, we could dance, we could jive, we could do all these things. Now, so let's have them in there. So the newer churches, and supposed to be more traditional Christian churches, are allowing an explosion of these things. But again, the issue of losing power and opening everything up also has its downside, because we are seeing some of the things that are going on in the absence of, canons of practice, liturgy that's been tested over hundreds and hundreds of years, is that people are creating things as they go. And so each person who sets up a space under a tree, pretty much then have their own, sort of opens their own kind of possibilities of expression. And that's also, in a way, can be quite dangerous if it's not monitored, or if it's not assessed in terms of whether it's adding to better energy, it's adding to the collective well-being, or it's actually creating a lot of negative energy.
And I think you're absolutely right. And it's something that, as a little footnote, I think, to what we've expressed the positive aspects of artistic expression, symbolism, and all this kind of thing. But this is Africa, right? There's also the dark side of things.
Correct.
Where symbols, sculptures, paintings, drawings remind you of the dark side, and bring someone's spirits from the dark side, and bring you into a place of darkness rather than a place of healing, a place of what is there. So I think also, those who are creative in these spaces are very important, because we trust them to create symbols and arts and creations that are healing rather than that are destructive or that bring terror. We are scared of certain things. You see a certain thing and you run for kilometers precisely because you know the symbolism but many of these things can.
It's like the point I was saying, that you're gonna ask someone what exactly connects with your soul. Like, have you noticed, like in certain seasons, there's songs that you can listen to, and then you say, this song I connect with it, and then next week you are into another song or a piece of art or a color. Then in this season, you know, this is the color that makes sense to me. Just like with art, it depends with the kind of art that someone is bringing out to you, or the kind of music that someone is bringing out to you. It connects with something, because where we're coming from, like I was saying, it's something it's intimate. It's something that's deep inside you. It's a soul thing. It's a soul, spirit, and mind thing. So it's gonna affect how you're going to see and pick up on something. Like you're saying, how somebody creates a piece of art that's dark, and you can literally see that this thing is just, it's terrifying. It's, when you look at it, you're not gonna pick. It's not the first thing you're gonna pick. But for somebody, when they look at it, it might be connected with something inside of them. So it's already a different kind of art. It's a different kind of expression.
Yeah, just to sort of pick up on the question that you asked about whether we within African spaces and traditions have the individual tradition of the individual. There are situations like that. Many people, when things really get bad, they will go and knock on the healer's door, right? And the two of them will sit somewhere, and then they'll start a dialogue, right? And sometimes the dialogue is ritualistic in terms of what happens. There might be a few herbs, either drunk or smoked or whatever it is, right? To facilitate the openness, right? And then it becomes a one-to-one thing. And even the prescriptions sometimes involve you being sent to do something, you know, climb that mountain and bring something on that mountain, right? And you have to do it alone, you know, or go and carve something. Find this particular stick in the forest and carve this, and or create a, you know, or make your own drum, right? So which means you have to go slaughter some animal and dry the skin and do and then come back and play the drum and all those kind of things. So yes, there are all kinds of rituals and spaces for individual.
Just to add on to that, it's quite interesting about what Sarah said about her grandmother was a healer. I come from the tradition also. My great-grandfather were healers, herbalist healers, and so she described exactly what I also grew up learning from my family, that there are moments when your grandfather or your grandmother will take you into quiet spaces. Very quiet, either on your own or with someone. It was always there. I remember one of the colleagues who passed on was a theater person from Bagamoyo in Tanzania, called Godfrey Kaduma. When he came here once and we were talking, and then he says to me, describe to me the processes where you train your children in Zimbabwe to listen. So I said, no, I don't actually recognize that immediately, right? But he said in his culture, there was a deliberate training when you're young to just be quiet and to listen to others. Deliberately. Now, when you're listening, you then are training children to have a reflective practice embedded into their cognitive processes when they're young. And those moments of self-reflection allow you to not be swayed when the seasons change, whether it's in music, whether it's in fashion, whether it's drugs of the day, and so forth. Because it allows you to go back and introspect and reflect. And if you can't do it on your own, there's always someone who pull you, you know, and say, just let me just, you know, find out what's going on with you. Right, but because now we don't live in villages and these more modern villages with gated walls and all these things, are bringing in all sorts of new voices speaking into us, into our children on a daily basis, and that's very confusing. And how we can recreate and reimagine a sense of broader worldview that's clearer for African children is one of the challenges that we may have to look at, so that they can actually look at the different, you know, frameworks and things that they can say, these are the things that can be a compass for me to navigate as I'm now inundated on a daily basis with cultures coming from 190 countries with their different, you know, multitudes of diversity. And therefore, how can we be surprised at the energies that God, sorts out?
There's one thing that has been bothering me, and even when I was reflecting about this, the whole COVID situation, not so much what the COVID is doing and what it demands of us, because the death, sickness, and everything else requires a certain response. But for me, what has been really bothering me is the government's prescription to this, that people must be isolated from each other, right? And that goes to the core of being anti what it means to be African, right? Africans are always tending to be together, always, or maybe it's poverty, maybe it's not, I don't know, but we end up in taxis, combis, in market spaces. There's always a tendency to seek other people, church the same, even the touch,
tactile all the time,
talking,
even when we greet, we don't just we have to hold it family. Yes.
and then the government comes along and says none of that is acceptable, right? You must do the exact opposite of what your sense of self tells you to do, right? And I think that is more traumatic than actually the disease itself, right? Many people tell you, this disease, but it's this isolation thing that terrorizes people. A lot of the mental problems have come up precisely because of the government's isolation idea. People stop working precisely because they're supposed to be isolated. Right? So hunger comes in, and then the stresses that come with that. And no one is proposing anything, right? And I think this is the one space where the arts are really, really crucial, right? Because you can take part in the arts and in artistic expression while still pretending to obey the government. The question of music, collective music, singing with other people, and that kind of thing. And I remember there was a period when people were using online ways of connecting, and different spaces, people would be dancing together, right, in their spaces, and they'll be singing together in their spaces, precisely because you feel the connection with another person once you begin to get into artistic expression of yourself. It's one thing to talk to the person, yes, we can talk, but no. When we dance together, when we sing together, then somehow the connection becomes much more visceral, much stronger, that kind of thing. And therefore, that way for me is one very important way of bringing healing to people. When really we don't have a choice, but we have to obey what the government says and what the medical people are saying.
Wow, so it's been a very interesting discussion for this very first MutiARTS Colloquium. I think we've really tried to diversify what is culture, the applications of art, expressively, creatively, traditional, otherwise. And even though we would love to continue this conversation today, we have to cut it short for our next colloquium. So we will be cutting our expressive medicine chat here. We will try and continue it online with your engagement, of course. So you can always send us messages on our Facebook platform, Tamba Africa Social Circus. You can also reach us via our email, tambaafricacircus@gmail.com, or mbidatherapy@gmail.com. So we can continue to actually explore what it means to use our creative expressions for healing and to use arts for healing. I would like to say thank you very much to all of our lovely panelists. Thank you, Sarah, joining us from Malawi. Thank you to Fortune, Taf Bob, Father Matsepane, and Farai. You've all been an incredible asset to this conversation, and I'm really grateful for all of your contributions. We hope to have you again on other colloquiums going forward. We will be joining others next week when we speak more about rhythmic medicine. So looking more at music, at sound, and even at vibrations, at energy that comes from music instruments, but also music vocals and words as well. So do join us at that colloquium. We'll be on Facebook Live next week. The link will be available on our event page. Thank you so much for participating online. I'm sure you've been engaging. Thank you so much for listening and for watching. And we hope that we will be able to be with you again at our next colloquium. Remember, it's rhythmic medicine. If you have any questions ahead of that, please feel free to let us know. We'd be happy to also research into that or anything that was discussed today. If you have any further questions or would like to add your own contributions, please do engage with us online. I'd also like to thank Adaptation Fund for co-sponsoring this event, and to thank the Jesuit Mission in Nuremberg and the Development Office here in Zimbabwe and Southern Africa. We will see you next time. Thank you so much for joining, and stay safe.